Ever wondered how a small, marshy island at the mouth of a river transformed into the city that never sleeps? How did this one tiny piece of land become the concrete jungle where dreams are made, the financial capital of the world, and a global icon of culture and resilience? Well, today, we're going on a journey through time, a deep dive into the incredible story of New York City's rise to greatness. From a humble trading post to a sprawling metropolis, this is the epic tale of how New York became, well, New York. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's rewind the clock 400 years. Our story begins in 1609, not with skyscrapers and yellow cabs, but with a lone ship sailing into a vast, uncharted harbor. The captain was Henry Hudson, an Englishman sailing for the Dutch, looking for a shortcut to Asia. He didn't find Asia, but he found something arguably more valuable: a magnificent natural harbor and a river teeming with life, especially beavers. Beaver pelts were like gold in 17th century Europe, and the Dutch West India Company saw a massive opportunity. By 1624, they had established a settlement on the southern tip of a long, narrow island the native Lenape people called Mannahatta. They named their new colony New Amsterdam. Now, don't picture the New York we know today. New Amsterdam was a rough-and-tumble outpost. It was a company town, driven by profit and the fur trade. The famous story of Peter Minuit buying Manhattan from the Lenape for 60 guilders worth of goods is a bit more complicated than the legend suggests. To the Lenape, land wasn't something you could own or sell permanently. They likely saw the transaction as an agreement to share the land, not a final sale. This fundamental misunderstanding would set the stage for future conflicts. But for the Dutch, it was a foothold. They built a fort, laid out a few crooked streets, some of which, like Broadway, still follow their original paths, and created a tiny, diverse community of traders, sailors, and settlers from all over Europe. It was a chaotic, cosmopolitan port from its very first days, a precursor to the melting pot it would become. But the Dutch grip on New Amsterdam was tenuous. Just a few hundred miles to the north, a rival power was growing: the English. England had its own colonies and its own ambitions. The Dutch colony of New Netherland sat right in the middle, like a wedge separating England's northern and southern territories. In 1664, with tensions rising between the two European powers, King Charles II of England decided he wanted the territory for himself. He granted the land to his brother, James, the Duke of York, and sent a fleet of warships to New Amsterdam's harbor. The Dutch governor, Peter Stuyvesant, a famously stubborn man with a wooden leg, wanted to fight. But the colonists, who were merchants more than soldiers, had little appetite for a battle they couldn't win. They surrendered without a single shot being fired. The English took over, and in honor of their new proprietor, New Amsterdam was immediately renamed New York. Under British rule, the city grew steadily. It became a major port for the British Empire, trading goods like flour, lumber, and enslaved people across the Atlantic. The population swelled, the economy prospered, and the city's importance grew. But as it grew, so did a new sense of identity. The colonists, though British subjects, were beginning to feel distinctly American. They chafed under British taxes and regulations, particularly the idea of taxation without representation. New York became a hotbed of revolutionary sentiment. Groups like the Sons of Liberty organized protests, boycotted British goods, and clashed with soldiers in the streets. When the American Revolution erupted in 1775, New York was at the very center of the conflict. In 1776, George Washington's Continental Army fought the Battle of Long Island, the largest battle of the entire war. Despite their bravery, the Americans were defeated, and the British occupied New York City for the next 7 years. It became their military and political headquarters for the duration of the war. For the patriots living there, it was a long and difficult occupation. But when the war finally ended in 1783, it was in New York that Washington gave his farewell address to his troops at Fraunces Tavern. For a brief but glorious period, from 1785 to 1790, New York City served as the first capital of the brand new United States of America. It was here that George Washington was inaugurated as the first president, and where the Bill of Rights was drafted. The city was no longer just a colony. It was the birthplace of a nation. The 19th century was the era that truly forged modern New York. The opening of the Erie Canal in 1825 was a game changer. This man-made waterway connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean via the Hudson River, making New York City the undisputed gateway to the American interior. Goods and people flowed through its port like never before. The city's economy exploded, and so did its population. But the biggest driver of this growth was immigration. Fleeing famine in Ireland, poverty in Italy, and persecution in Eastern Europe, millions of people saw New York as a beacon of hope. They crowded onto steamships, endured grueling transatlantic voyages, and arrived at Ellis Island with little more than the clothes on their backs and a dream of a better life. They poured into neighborhoods like the Lower East Side, living in crowded tenement buildings and working long hours in factories and sweatshops. Life was incredibly hard, but they brought with them their cultures, their languages, their foods, and their traditions, creating the vibrant, multicultural tapestry that defines New York to this day. This was the era of the melting pot, a term that perfectly captured the city's dynamic and often chaotic mix of people. New York became a city of neighborhoods, each with its own distinct character: Little Italy, Chinatown, the Jewish Lower East Side. The city was growing, not just outwards, but upwards. As New York entered the 20th century, it began to soar. A new technology, steel frame construction, combined with the invention of the elevator, unleashed a race to the sky. The city's iconic skyline, the one recognized the world over, began to take shape. First came the Flatiron Building in 1902, then the Woolworth Building. The Roaring Twenties saw a frenzy of construction, culminating in an epic battle for the title of the world's tallest building. In 1930, the Chrysler Building, an Art Deco masterpiece, briefly held the crown, only to be surpassed just 11 months later by the colossal Empire State Building. These skyscrapers weren't just buildings. They were symbols of American ambition, power, and modernity. New York was no longer just a city. It was an aspiration. It was the Jazz Age, the Harlem Renaissance, the bright lights of Broadway. It was the city of dreams. Of course, the city's story